Hello and welcome. I'm Michelle Abad, and you're watching Rappler Talk. Since November 2022, the Philippine Senate has been investigating reports of migrant workers being trafficked and forced to work in cryptocurrency scams across Southeast Asia. Filipinos are among those who have survived the trafficking. Survivors of this trafficking scheme, when asked to testify in public, tell similar stories. They speak of finding a job posting on social media, promising work as a call center agent or technical support. Through coordination with a recruiter, they eventually end up in so-called scam hubs in Cambodia, Myanmar, or even the Philippines. They are told to befriend Caucasian men and con them to invest in cryptocurrency. Failure to scam people meant salary cuts or physical abuse. The survivors have spoken about encountering multiple nationalities of workers. Though these reports have been around for months, the Philippines continues to rescue and repatriate workers from these hubs. During the ASEAN summit in Indonesia earlier this month, it was reported that more than 1,000 victims were rescued in a matter of days. Southeast Asian leaders vowed to crack down on online scams operated by human traffickers to prey on vulnerable job seekers, particularly in the poorest countries of the region. To help us understand this phenomenon and what it says about the human rights situation in Southeast Asia, I'm virtually sitting down with Phil Robertson, Asia Deputy Director at Human Rights Watch. Phil, welcome to the show. Hello, Phil.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you very much. I am here, and thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you also for giving us your time this morning. So I just want to get into the context or the background of these cryptocurrency scam operations that we've been hearing about. So in your research, based on your research, are these cryptocurrency scam operations new? And can you give us some background about human trafficking in Southeast Asia and particularly how it happens in the region?
Well, the cryptocurrency scam operations that you're talking about are actually part of a larger group of scams. And they're done in different ways, but some of the core elements are similar. You know, the online recruitment, the fake advertisement, the basically taking control of a victim, taking control of their passport, and then forcing them to scam people. And if they fail to do so, physical abuse or worse. A lot of these are being run by Chinese syndicates, and there's a term that they use. They call it pig butchering. The idea is that you fatten up the pig before you butcher it. And that terminology tells you a lot about how these scammers, these scam bosses view their victims. Some of these scams are romance-based. Others are about, getting people to make investments, making believe that these are real investments. There's even cases where we've had like fake police, in setups that look like police stations telling people that they're in trouble and they need to pay to get out of it. Some of these involve investments in cryptocurrency. Some of them are, basically getting access to bank accounts. But the larger issue is that this has grown exponentially, and it's involving people from across the region and further afield. We even have people from Africa who are being trafficked to these scam centers. The people that are being held there are, duped to work and then controlled. They are trafficking victims, and this is the sort of thing that the Philippines government needs to get on top of.
Right. I wanted to go into the profile of the types of people that are lured and duped into these types of operations. So, you know how in the Philippines, we're familiar with narratives of Filipinos going into precarious work abroad because of the need to provide for their families. So I was wondering, does this reflect as well in other Southeast Asian countries?
Yes, it really does. And, we see Thais, Cambodians, Lao, Vietnamese, nationals of South Asian countries like Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka. And as I mentioned, even Africans being caught up in these trafficking centers, these scam centers. There are literally dozens of countries that have nationals that are involved in this. And a lot of it came up, frankly, around the desperation connected to the COVID pandemic. When people across the globe lost work, they were then confined to home, they were online, people were desperate for income. And then up pops this possible job, that sounds too good to be true. And in fact, if it does sound too good to be true, the real lesson of this is it probably is.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm pretty sure this exacerbated, the situation of people leaving homes to find work abroad. But you did also mention, how different factors come into play here. So I did want to know and ask, how rampant is trafficking in the region today, and maybe compare it to recent years as well?
Well, these scam centers are huge. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of victims across the region. Um, I've actually heard estimates that are plausible as many as 100,000 trafficking victims in Cambodia alone. So it is really an exponential increase in human trafficking. Um, it's important to recognize that these scamming centers are operating, with the knowledge of local authorities, and people are looking the other way, or they have their hand out and getting money from it. So for all the talk in the ASEAN meetings about how we have to attack this issue and stuff like that, there's a number of people that are basically talking out of both sides of their mouth. That they're involved, but then they're saying that they're going to be tough. Um, the trafficking in the region is getting worse, much worse, and this is being fueled by mobility, of course, because people are able to restart travel after the COVID pandemic. But it's also the internet, the pervasive online communication to people across the region that allows the scammers and others to get to these people and then try to persuade them to go work in a different country.
Mm. You talked about how there were hundreds of thousands. Let me just clarify, that's for all
Hundreds.
types of human trafficking, right? Not just for crypto scams.
Well, it's not just for crypto scams. I mean, but what we're talking about, the numbers that we're talking about right now are these online cyber scam centers, whether it's for cryptocurrency, whether it's for romance and getting people to transfer money, whether it's the fake police scams. I mean, there's literally dozens of different scams that are
Mhm.
in different types, targeting different people. You've got some of these people are trying to recruit Mandarin speakers, because they're targeting Chinese. Others are trying to target English language speakers because they're going after Western Europe or North America.
Mhm.
It literally is like a forest of scamming with
Right.
different types of arrangements. But the bottom line is that people are being duped into doing this and then being controlled and abused if they don't.
Mm. What do you think this says about our standards for trafficking? Because, we hear about the trafficking in persons report from the U.S. about, well, for example, in our case in the Philippines has been boasting a tier 1 status in the Philippines for several years in a row now, which means for our viewers that the Philippines has been satisfying the minimum requirements for what it takes to battle trafficking. But yet, we're still seeing high numbers. So how can we reconcile this data?
Well, I think that the tier 1 assessment by the U.S. State Department, frankly, is has a political dynamic to it. This is uh, giving a break to an ally, and I think if that you looked at the facts on the ground in the Philippines and what is happening to overseas contract workers who leave the Philippines, and it's quite clear that tier 1 is not deserved. I think basically the situation is one where this trafficking into these scam centers is something that is new, really, in the last couple of years, and it's something that the governments are racing to catch up and deal with. Um, a lot of the police, frankly, don't have the tools to be even able to understand that. They can, receive a complaint from someone who's been scammed or someone whose relative has been trafficked. But if that person is in Laos or in Cambodia or somewhere else, there's not a lot they can do, and there's not a lot they're willing to do. Frankly, it's sort of beyond their understanding,
Mhm.
and so there needs to be specialist units set up by the Philippines government to deal with this. And until they do that, we're going to continue to see Filipinos being exploited overseas in these scam centers.
Yeah, I do wonder, how we have been, a curious question of how we have been able to keep up with the tier 1 status, even though technology is evolving and there are so many new ways that human traffickers have been duping people into precarious work and dangerous work. So let's talk about the mode of recruitment, particularly in these cryptocurrency scams. So the survivors have talked about finding dubious opportunities on social media platforms like Facebook or encrypted messaging apps like Telegram. So how has technology change the processes of human trafficking, and what should tech platforms be doing to address this?
Well, the most simple answer to that is the technology allows the traffickers to send a message directly to you via your phone. The thing that you spend probably the most time in any given day looking at. It's delivery right to your eyes. And so the online tech, allows for delivery of enticing messages. In some ways, it's like setting a mousetrap. They're advertising and they leave it, and then the people see it and come in. It's just a huge expansion in outreach and able to reach people in remote areas where the level of knowledge about these kind of scams may not be that high. As for the tech platforms and the companies like Facebook or Telegram, they're simply not doing their jobs. They're not policing their platforms the way they should. Facebook is particularly responsible. They claim that they're doing things, but it's not really working. It's encrypted messaging apps like Telegram. To be honest, they've never really indicated they care very much about what people are saying, using their app for, and what they're saying in the first place. I've noticed just in the last month or so on Twitter, there's been a huge expansion of recruitment efforts there. Every day now I'm deleting scammer messages, from, fake profiles of young women who said, "Oh, I've just come to Bangkok and I don't have any friends. Can I show you around? Can you show me around?" or things like that. Elon Musk in purchasing Twitter, he's basically dismantled the structures to oversee content and look out for bad actors on the platform. So what we're seeing is a massive dereliction of a responsibility for businesses to care about human rights. And the tech platforms really need to raise their game, but they haven't done so.
How do we balance making sure these platforms are safe and also protecting privacy of people? I feel like that's an ongoing debate here in the Philippines. How we have lots of crime happening here. It's not just in the realm of trafficking, but for example, illegal drugs transactions and other similar crimes like these can be transacted through messaging apps like these. And I recall from the hearings from the Senate here that the crypto scam survivors found the job postings on Facebook, and it looks like there's nothing wrong. It says call center agent. It doesn't say that, a call center agent in Thailand. It doesn't say that you're going to Myanmar directly. So
Yeah.
At first glance, you think that there's nothing wrong. And then when you start engaging with the person who posted it, that's when they transfer to an encrypted messaging app like Telegram. And that's where they continue to facilitate their migration from the Philippines or whatever Southeast Asian country into these cryptocurrency scam hubs. So, people would still need their privacy. We have people here who, in the Philippines, we have issues with the anti-terrorism law that was controversial when former President Duterte passed it. We also have the SIM card registration act over here, and it was worrying for some sectors here in the Philippines about government surveillance. So how is it possible, or how can we balance that? Keeping spaces safe, keeping technology safe, but also protecting privacy of people.
Well, I think, let me be very clear that Human Rights Watch supports end-to-end encryption. And we don't think that governments trying to break that encryption, like, for instance, the government of India has been trying to do with WhatsApp, trying to force them to, reveal what is going on in chats. I mean, in fact, a lot of these tech platforms don't even have the ability to do that. The encryption keeps them out as well. But I think that what we need to see is governments working with these platforms and saying to these platforms, look, we need to do investigations about who is doing this, who is putting these ads up there, who is, the contacts, for this, and work together to try to ferret out who is doing this. This is basic investigations, that false advertising, duping people is being put up there. There needs to be dedicated units prepared to follow this up and try to find out who has been trafficked and save them. That is a big problem. And we're not seeing that kind of dedicated effort. The governments, they're issuing statements and then throwing up their hands.
I'm curious about how non-government organizations and nonprofits like Human Rights Watch, and maybe if you have knowledge of other non-NGOs engaging in anti-human trafficking rights, like how can you help us understand how NGOs like yourselves and other organizations, help in the combating of human trafficking, perhaps alongside government and maybe on your own as well?
Well, I mean, what Human Rights Watch is doing is we're trying to publicize what is happening. And we're doing research for a coming report about these scam centers in Cambodia and other places as well. There are other NGOs that we work with who would do a lot more in terms of being contact points for people who are in these scam centers who are trying to escape, who are trying to communicate with the outside world about where they are, who they are, what has happened to them. And we're not in that frontline work. We frankly don't have the personnel to do that, but we work with those organizations that do. And the key element is trying to identify who the victims are, where they're from, and where they are now. Because if they can identify who they are and where they are, then there's a possibility of trying to organize some sort of intervention, either a rescue or pressuring the government of that country to do something to get them out. What we've been seeing is that if you can actually identify who's been trafficked, their names, if you have, like, for instance, photos or the picture of their passport or something like that, and you go to like a government of Cambodia, the Cambodian government will say, okay, we're going to get that person, and they'll go get them. And the traffickers have to recognize that, okay, if someone's identified and the government comes knocking on the door, they have to let them go. But it's really a drop in the bucket. We're not seeing the kind of systematic efforts. It's really sort of all left on the NGOs to, do the footwork to try to find these people and try to figure out where they are, and then present the information and try to get people released. And, we're not even keeping up with the numbers that are being newly trafficked into these centers.
Can you maybe expound on that a little bit more? The observations of the dynamics between governments who are intervening as well as the non-government organizations that are helping out. I know, for example, there was the recent case that we did report on about 6 Filipinos who were recently repatriated here in the Philippines, how they came from Myanmar, and their workplace was just around the border, near Myawaddy, and then they had to go they had to cross the border by themselves, and it wasn't until they were at the Thailand side that the Philippine authorities were able to assist them. So and there was also some help there from concerned individuals, from advocates, for a part of the Filipino community. Is this also seen among other nationalities, that when these particular nationals, like Thai nationals, Indonesian nationals, when they try to escape such situations, that there is perhaps a primary role that the NGOs are undertaking when it comes to these rescues?
Well, the NGOs are trying first and foremost to figure out, as I said, names, identities, nationalities, and whereabouts. With that information, then it can be sorted out what to do next. In cases like this, it may have been that they were released. It may have been that they escaped, that group of Filipinos. We don't know. But what we've seen is that where a government goes to, whether it be the Myanmar government or the Cambodian government, and also in some cases the Lao government, if they go to them and they have detailed information about their nationals who are being held, then a lot of times, if you're talking to the right people in that government, the government that will then intervene and say, okay, you've got to release those people. As I said, it has to be government to government pressure. When the foreign minister of Indonesia went to Cambodia last year, one of the things she did was stopped in on the national police chief of Cambodia, because she had a whole list of Indonesians who had been trafficked, who they had figured out who they were and where they were, and they wanted them all released. It is a situation where there are people from all over the region. The same thing is going, like, from the Indian government raising issues in Myanmar, saying we've got these 20 people, you need to go get them and send them back to us. If that kind of pressure comes government to government, then a lot of times these governments that are serving as essentially the hosts of these trafficking syndicates will do the right thing. But it is a labor intensive, it is difficult, and it involves a tremendous amount of research and risk. Because if it's found that these people have in fact communicated outside, there's a possibility that they'll be resold to another syndicate and moved elsewhere, and then the whole game starts again.
Another complication that we've been hearing about, like for example, when that group of six that I was talking about earlier were rescued and brought back here to Manila, there was an office under the office of the president, who they helped facilitate the escape and rescue and rehabilitation of them here. And the reporters asked how the dynamics would be for rescuing the Filipinos who were left behind. And one of the officers there from under the office of the president said that it would be difficult to coordinate directly with the Myanmar junta, because there are, quote, diplomatic implications that they couldn't really get into, because they said that their only job was to rescue. So we're seeing, the different dynamics of, even though, ideally it should be government to government, there are places of political insecurity, such as in the case of Myanmar. So in rescuing trafficked workers, how can governments navigate around these dynamics of political insecurity, such as in the case of Myanmar?
Well, I think that's a very good question. The situation in the Myanmar junta and the areas where these trafficking centers are on the Myanmar side of the Thai-Myanmar border. A lot of these are in areas that are not under the direct control of the Myanmar junta. They're being controlled by local militias, which are known as border guard forces, that are in fact sort of operating under the control of the Myanmar military, but sort of have a great deal of independence. And what we've seen is that if people reach to the Myanmar junta and, and say, we have a group of our people that are being held in this center, in this area, that the Myanmar junta will then go to that border guard force and say, okay, you got to go and get those people out. That's what India has done. That's what Bangladesh has done. That's what others have done. But it also means, yes, you have to engage with an odious military junta that is committing crimes against humanity every day against its own people. And, that's a balancing act. How do you get your people out of this very difficult situation while at the same time giving the least amount of legitimacy that you can to a junta that is committing serial human rights abuses? It's very hard. But it's the lawlessness in that area that is in fact part of the ongoing conflict in sort of slide into civil war in Myanmar that allows these scam centers to operate so freely. And, that was why there needs to be a larger solution in Myanmar that returns the country to peace and a democracy and a respectful human rights respecting government.
Mm-hmm. Is there like an initial quick answer that Human Rights Watch has to that question? How can we engage with these governments while not legitimizing the reported human rights abuses that are happening there? Is there an initial recommendation of how government should be navigating about this?
Look, I think that every government has an obligation to protect their nationals wherever they are in the world. And certainly I think the Philippines government recognizes that, because you have so many OCWs who are overseas. I think you do it in a way which is determined. You try to keep it minimal profile, but you need to go to whoever you believe can actually get your people out, and that is just the reality of it. I think there's also an argument to say that in addition to pressuring to have a regional solution to this, to have an ASEAN pressure on this, you also need to recognize that you have to sometimes do deals with the devil in order to get your people safe. And, there's just no way around that.
Yeah, it is quite difficult when we're seeing it also in the dynamics of the two departments we have here in the Philippines, how before, the migrant workers used to be handled by the Department of Labor and Employment as well as the Department of Foreign Affairs. But now we have a new department, the Department of Migrant Workers, and there seems to be a balancing act of diplomacy and protecting migrant workers. We're seeing that with Kuwait, but that's another story for another time. But it is a challenge of balancing diplomacy and getting your people out as soon as possible, especially with the circumstances we've been hearing about the gravity of these human rights abuses that have been happening in these cryptocurrency scams. So we're looking at really worrying numbers. You mentioned the hundreds of thousands, and even in this crypto scam alone, we might be seeing a couple of thousands. So as shown by the issue's inclusion in the recent ASEAN summit in Indonesia, human trafficking is a regional concern, and it has been, I suppose, for quite some time. So how does Human Rights Watch view this concern of regional leaders, and what should ASEAN governments do to not only curb but stop trafficking?
Well, look, I think there needs to be unified pressure on three key countries here that are ASEAN members, and which are, basically hosting these cyber scam human trafficking centers, and that's Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. The other governments have to basically pressure the leaders of those countries to stop looking the other way and to actually take action against some of their elites, in politics and business, who are collaborating with these syndicates. To give you an idea of how bad it is, Al Jazeera and other investigative journalists found that, top level people in Cambodia are directly involved with these syndicates, including Hun Sen's nephew, Hun To. Hun To can't go to Australia anymore because they won't give him a visa because they know he's involved with some of these syndicates. ASEAN needs to be more than just a talk shop. It needs to be something that says, okay, we're going to work on this as a region. There has to be, a systematic approach, some sort of regional working group where governments are prepared to deliver uncomfortable messages to other members. Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, they're making money off of the exploitation of the people of other nations in ASEAN. That this has to stop. And the scam centers, it's not just the people who are being trafficked that we're worried about. We're also worried about the scams. I mean, people in places like Thailand are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have a friend who was scammed out of 30,000 baht, which is almost $1,000, just last week. This is happening across the country. And this is happening in other countries as well. So it is absolutely imperative that there be an effort to really go after these syndicates and these leaders. The reality is that there's been no accountability, either for the syndicate leaders, many of them Chinese, who have left the mainland and come to these countries to run these syndicates, nor the elites in governments who are protecting them. And that is the bottom line. As long as the impunity continues, the scams will continue and people will suffer.
Definitely. Thank you for ending on that note on impunity. And definitely we will be watching out on this issue, not just the media, but also we trust that Human Rights Watch, as well as other human rights watchdogs, will be watching out for this issue. So I think we can end on that note. Thank you, Phil, for joining the show.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
I'm Michelle Abad, and this has been Rappler Talk. Thank you for watching.